I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back yet again to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our next segment, as we have been getting into our AFC divisional betting previews, I do want to remind you yet again that since this is now a live show, more opportunities are available to you, my faithful audience, to leave comments if you so choose. So make yourselves available to the use of Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Sticker now that we are a YouTube live show and we are monetized. You can also consider leaving tips or donations as well. They're greatly appreciated, as all the network and myself and my fellow podcasters are transitioning into this new horizon. So it's very exciting. Do what you can to support this show because I greatly appreciate it and we all greatly appreciate it as well because we really want this show to be more about you. Without further ado, let's jump from the AFC East to another fascinating division, perhaps the best in the entire NFL, and that is the AFC North. In all reality, this is the division that everyone expects to put their team into the playoffs in. Maybe not the Steelers this year because, the quarterback situation is a little bit murky there, but who knows? Mike Tomlin has just been the guy for them for so many seasons that you can't put it past the Steelers to make the playoffs. So we'll talk a little bit about those odds later on in this segment. But let's start off with the favorites in this division, the Baltimore Ravens, plus 145. They are a team that I really like. And the reason why I do is that their style of offense and what their defense brought last year, which is they're going to have to kind of mitigate what with the loss of Mike McDonald to the Seattle Seahawks, who I'll gladly take as my new head coach, and how that defense transitions under new DC Zach Orr. That's going to be a huge thing. But when I look at this offense, and I look at how it interprets the modern NFL, and I look at how Lamar Jackson has really improved as a QB, and I look at how they've used so many different schemes in terms of using their running backs to great effect, and I look at how they're now buying into needing a wide receiver like Zay Flowers. This is a very interesting team to kind of wrap your head around, sink your teeth into in terms of placing bets on. And now that, Lamar Jackson feels comfortable throwing to his new receivers, the bringing in of Derrick Henry might be my only big issue with this offense. Because Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, no matter how much their injury history has impacted how this team has looked, I really liked the running back by committee approach that the Ravens employed throughout Lamar Jackson's reign. And losing them means that you're trying to make it more so that Lamar will be comfortable throwing the football, and that's fine. Because I think the more and more Lamar improves as a passer, the more and more confident you can be in that he is the answer, and yes, he will finally break through to get to the Super Bowl. But Derrick Henry, I don't think he's the right profile for a Baltimore Ravens running back, especially when you think about other teams that use a system, like, for example, the Miami Dolphins. We want that speed and the depth at the running back position to alleviate some of the burdens on someone who might be as comfortable as a passer. But with all that being said, the Ravens, in my humble opinion, are still the favorites due to the defense. I still think this defense, despite the loss of Patrick Queen, is a big loss. I still like their secondary a lot. I love Geno Stone. And I think that this defense will not miss a beat. Zach Orr will figure it all out. And I think that they will be okay. And that's why I still have them as my divisional favorite. To win the Super Bowl, they're also one of the favorites at plus 1,000. But in order to do that, I think that A, they need to take care of business and trying to wrap up the number one seed. It's going to be very competitive. But if they do wrap up the number one seed, much like they did last year, home field advantage is going to be key. And I think that Lamar will be more comfortable at home, even though last year he lost at home to the Chiefs. They were the Chiefs, though. And they were on a historic run. but I think that this year will be a bit different should the Ravens lock up the number 1 seed. And then let's talk about the other favorite in this division, also tied as well, the Bengals, plus 165 actually to win the division. And the Cincinnati Bengals, the whole story about them is that they are a team that really has it all figured out. Even though there has been tension surrounding contract situations, should this team remain wholly intact, they are a very well-balanced team that should be able to challenge the Chiefs in the AFC and potentially go to the Super Bowl. And despite Joe Burrow's injury history, when he has been on the field, are you really putting it past him that he can be the guy to finally usurp Patrick Mahomes? Because he did it before. And I think he's the best equipped to do it again. Even though I love Josh Allen, I think Joe Burrow is the best equipped, well with his weapons, and whether or not this team will remain intact, to go up against Patrick Mahomes. With that being said, I am concerned about that wrist injury coming off of last season, because it can truly affect his throwing motion, and Joe Burrow is all about his motion in terms of how he throws the football and how it impacts accuracy, because Joe Burrow is one of the best pure passers in the NFL right now. And to have an injury like that can really mess with your system, especially with all these receivers that he has. You have Jamar Chase, who's your number 1 option. You have T. Higgins, but who potentially could be seeing out his contract and leaving in the future. But at the end of the day, I feel like Joe Burrow, if he comes out flat, will have time to grow into. Because remember, the Bengals haven't always started off hot. And I think that'll be fine for them. If they can grow into the season, then I think the Bengals will be really, really dangerous. That being said, watch out for Burrow in terms of his wrist and how it will affect his throwing motion. That being said, I'm excited to consider him. He has been someone who, as a comeback player of the year candidate, is also appealing. As my mother, again, Meryl Shepard, says, how has Burrow performed during camp? I haven't really been following that many training camp narratives surrounding Joe Burrow. But that being said, I feel like with any quarterback really being impacted by injury, they want to ease them back in. I don't necessarily think he's been centered around contact drills or things of that nature, but he has been throwing. From the minimal stuff that I have heard coming out of Bengals camp, I have heard that they're working him back. They haven't played him during preseason, so I expect that he will be ready to go by week 1, but who knows? The whole narrative surrounding him has been one of uncertainty in this offseason, mainly due to the fact that we haven't heard that much about him. But from the stuff, like I said, that I have heard, he should be good to go week 1, and his performance during camp reflects that, as they want to work him back easily rather than throw him into the fire. But as we were saying before, he's a very appealing comeback player of the year candidate, and at plus 300, I'm really liking that bet because, in the modern NFL, when you think about comeback player of the year, last year Joe Flacco won it, or did he win it? I forget now, but in a situation like that's not going to happen again, where you have a guy who literally comes off his couch and performs like that. That's not going to happen again. And Joe Burrow, making himself a name in the NFL, a guy who everybody loves, a guy who really is seen as the villain in the tale of who's trying to beat Patrick Mahomes in the AFC. I think that whole narrative, and if he performs well combined, will give him that Comeback Player of the Year award. Now let's talk about a very, very interesting, controversial team in the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns are kind of like the Jets, except much worse off, because they committed so much money to Deshaun Watson to perform, and he hasn't done it thus far. You can blame injuries all you want, but in the games that he has played, he has looked horrendous. Decent at best, maybe, but overall horrendous. However, If there was any hope, his last game before sustaining the shoulder injury that ended his season was a decent one, where I believe in the second half against a Baltimore Ravens defense that, to that point, was one of the best in the NFL. He was perfect in terms of that, in terms of passing and completion. So if they get that Deshaun Watson, and he's just, worked into the system perfectly, because I know Kevin Stefanski really can get QBs to buy into his culture and identity. He did it with Baker Mayfield when they made the playoffs that first time. And if they want to make the playoffs this year, he's going to have to do it again. So if Deshaun Watson is just serviceable, I think the Browns could be okay. But there are still so many questions. Also, what about Nick Chubb? Will he ever get worked back into this offense? Will he ever look the same after sustaining the same injury he did in college this time around? And I think that, all the Browns running back woes play into the narrative that this team really could be in dire straits early on the offensive side of the ball. Because when I look at the offensive weapons outside of the running backs and transitioning to the receiver room, I'm really scared for them in terms of who they have. You have an aging Amari Cooper. You have Jerry Jeudy, who you traded for from the Broncos, who really hasn't broken out consistently enough on Denver for me to trust him as a receiver who fits in this offense. And then you have, I believe Elijah Moore is still there. I'm not sure anymore, but the fact that I'm not even sure about his status should tell you all you need to know about what he has been. The only person I really like on this Browns offense in terms of weapons that for Deshaun Watson is David Njoku. I really like him as their tight end. He really flourished, at least under the Flacco regime. Let's see if he can replicate that. And the season at large. Another question from my mother, Meryl Shepard, to hear about the Browns talking to Jameis Winston. Yes, they actually did sign him as the backup, and it will be interesting to see if Deshaun Watson, should he not perform that well, if Jameis Winston will step in and kind of be Flacco-esque and lead this team to the postseason again. But at the current moment in time, I do still believe the Browns can't, give up on Deshaun Watson, because $200 million guaranteed plus is an absurd amount of money to invest. And in order for this narrative to be righted, this whole ship to be righted, they're going to need him to perform. And so, while I really like the addition of Jameis Winston to their QB room, I really like him. I hope the best for him. I do think that at this current moment, you can't necessarily give up on the whole Deshaun Watson saga just yet. And I really think that ultimately the Browns should be fine offensively if the defense stays up to its standard. Jim Schwartz, fantastic job by him in order to really supplement a struggling offense last year. One of the best defenses, if not the best defense in the land. They still have Myles Garrett there, and their cornerback trio, Denzel Ward, Martin Emerson Jr., Greg Newsome II. Highly impressive, perhaps the best CB trio in the league. And I still have them at under in terms of 8.5 wins at plus 120. But, in terms of the competitiveness of the AFC and the competitiveness of this division, I really think the Browns are set to at least potentially sneak in as that third place team from this division and clinch a playoff berth. Let's talk about briefly the Steelers before we go to break, because I do want to mention them, because they are an interesting tale here. No matter what you want to believe, I don't think that the whole QB1 situation is settled just yet. Yes, Tomlin has come out and said in recent conferences that he has more confidence that Russell Wilson will be the QB1. In fact, I do believe he will be. But I still think Justin Fields is talented enough to lead this offense. And when you think about the future for the Pittsburgh Steelers, you want a youthful, experienced guy who has that dual threat ability, no matter the whole turnover caveats, to lead this offense. I really like Russell Wilson, but investing that much money in him to potentially see him as a bridge option was kind of confusing. And I think that this Justin Fields development story will be the more positive factor for them, because if Justin Fields develops, then I think that he will be the future of this franchise. Going forward for the Steelers, at plus 185 to make the playoffs, I think that in order for that to happen, you're going to need to have an infrastructure around your team, if it's Russell Wilson that you entrust with the QB1 position, that really makes him comfortable in the system. Because that's who Russell Wilson is. If he's not comfortable in a system, he will make it known. And so, Mike Tomlin and Russell Wilson fit together perfectly, but it's going to have to translate on the field because there's not much depth outside of Pickens and Freiermuth in terms of weapons for the Steelers. And so it's all going to be about Russell Wilson finding that connection with his top guys and really being comfortable with whatever Mike Tomlin tells him to do. Because that's this kind of correlation between them. They're two guys who are very business-oriented in this league and just want to get the job done. So that whole situation will be a huge factor should Russell Wilson win this QB battle. Let's just about do it for this AFC North betting preview. Coming next, we transition to most young, youthful, exciting division in all of football, the AFC South. So many fascinating teams and storylines there as well. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about them.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without